Hello there, digital world, and welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. I hope you all are keeping well out there. Are you all happy? I hope so. That would be nice. It would make me feel good if you all were happy. So we're just coming off a big weekend for movies and pop culture wise. The San Diego Comic-Con was finally back in all its glory after being sidelined for the past 3 years, thanks to everything that's been going on. As expected, there was a lot of surprises, a lot of special guests, a lot of trailers dropped, a lot of announcements. Marvel Cinematic Universe, as expected, a big spectacle announcing films all the way out until 2025. So I thought, what better way to celebrate all this wonderful new content than to do a top 10 video about movies that came out 11 years ago. Now, I probably will address at some point all the different things that have happened, but to be honest, everybody else all over the social media and the interwebs is doing it for me, and everybody's take I either agree with or I disagree with. As expected, all the complainers are now very excited about things that haven't even happened yet, just to be disappointed by them later on. So I don't feel like getting involved in that. Instead, I'm continuing a regular series here on this podcast, this YouTube, wherever you're listening to me, where I do my top 10s, and it's either a top 10 for a particular year or a top 10 in a specific genre. My last one I did was top 10 DreamWorks movies, which got surprisingly a large reception to that. I believe probably because I accidentally timed it with The Bad Guys coming out. I didn't realize that, but that may have been why that one tracked more than my top 10 Quentin Tarantino movies or my top 10 musicals. Who's to say? But aside from that, we have mainly been working our way back through the years, with the exception of whatever current year we're on. So, for example, I started this podcast in 2019, so I have in real time ranked 2019 films, 2020 films, and 2021. Otherwise, we've been going backwards, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. And we are now up to the top 10 movies of 2011, specifically Spliced In Later's top 10 movies. This list was particularly difficult because a lot of these movies are in my favorites of all time because, I had left school, was starting university. University, you have a lot of free time on your hands. You end up going to the movies quite often. I was really starting to come into that sense of movies are a thing that I'm really passionate about. So I'm going to see a lot of different things across a lot of different content. Obviously, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in its early days, so this list is not dominated per se by Marvel. And when I say that, I mean it still is, but not specifically the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I suppose. And also, because so much time has passed, it's been 11 years since 2011. Over time, I have acquired more films and watched more things that came out in 2011. So a list I would have made at the end of 2011 in real time would look exceedingly different to the list I'm about to present to you now because of all the different things I've seen over the course of the last few years. We'll get into it quickly because these episodes tend to run long, but as usual, some ground rules before we get going. A new ground rule for this one is that some of these movies that I mentioned in my top 10 I may not talk about for very long because we're getting into the point now where a lot of these movies I have talked about extensively in other episodes, whether they are Marvel movies or top 10 Disney films or animation or anything like that. There's quite a few on here that have been addressed. Some even have their own episodes donated, devoted specifically to those movies. So a lot of what I have to say I've already said. So there might be more of a quick summary and a move on at that point. But don't take that to think, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just plowing through these movies without really explaining anything. The first part is true. I often don't know what I'm talking about. But if you want to hear me talk more about some of these movies that are on here, I will mention as we're going the other places to find some more in-depth analysis of the movies on the list. Number 2, as often stated, I have not seen everything that came out in 2011. Even 11 years later, I still haven't caught every movie that was ever released. I know there are some movies that I probably never will see, and some that I want to that I just haven't got around to. I mean, we're getting to that point now where you probably don't have a top 10 2011 list that you keep close to your heart and are waiting for this episode to drop. But if you have a very specific selection of films from 2011 and they're not on this list, one of the reasons could be that I just haven't seen it. And as stated many times before, I can't rank a film I have not seen. If I hear a movie is great in 2011, unless I see it with my own eyes, it's not going to be on my top 10 list. These movies aren't also the most critically acclaimed films of the year. Some of them are, some of them aren't. This is a completely biased personal list for movies that I just enjoy and I like to rewatch and have stuck with me. Some of these, you may go, why is that on the list? Because I liked it, and that's really it. And also, my list will be different from yours as well, because we all have different tastes. So I may say that I like a film that you despise. I may not list a film that you think is the greatest ever. Everybody has different opinions. As I always say, if you are enraged or annoyed in any way, the best way to get over it is to go look at the list of 2011 films, work your way through them, pick your top 10, and that's your list. And feel free to share it if you want. Nobody does, but if you want to, go for it. Not everybody's going to agree, but no person's one list is the correct list. Only for yourself. All right. Now that that's all out of the way, we are going to really just get into it and plow through. So I hope you enjoy Spliced In Later's top 10 movies of 2011. All right, kicking off our list at number 10 is Winnie the Pooh. The 2011 Winnie the Pooh, I should say, not the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, obviously. I mean, that's the title of this episode. The last 2D style animation film that was released by Disney, sort of a love letter to Winnie the Pooh and friends. Now, I have discussed this movie in another episode. If you're looking for a more detailed look into this film, check out my episode about the revival era of Disney and the Disney films that came out from 2010 onwards. It's quite a good episode. Putting it simply though, Winnie the Pooh cracks onto the top 10 where others just fell short because it is surprisingly an enjoyable little film and it's extremely wholesome. Winnie the Pooh is just a love letter to the stories of Pooh and friends, Tiglet, Eeyore, Rabbit, all of them. It's not urgent in any sense of the word. It's not like something that Pooh has to solve a crisis before the end of the world goes. It's just, here's a day in the 100-acre wood. Pooh really wants honey. He goes off looking for it. He discovers that someone has taken Eeyore's tail. He helps Tigger hunt a heffalump. It's really simple stuff. It builds on that whole way of telling Pooh stories, which is set in a book and there's a narrator and all of that. But it's extremely wholesome. It is a perfect feel-good movie. So if you're having a rough day or if things aren't looking up for you, you can put this film on and just feel good. For the last 2D animated film for Disney, it's a nice send-off to show how good they were at providing animated stories in that content. And the humor in here is surprisingly good. It's very sharp, it's very quick-witted, the comedic timing is great. Pooh had some moments in this movie that had me laugh out loud in hysterics. For a Winnie the Pooh movie of all things. It's very short, it's barely over an hour, but it is just... I mean, maybe it's a little bit of bias as well because I do really have a soft spot for the world of Winnie the Pooh and those characters. But I think, I don't know, it's sandwiched in between Tangled and Wreck-It Ralph. So it often gets forgotten or skipped over when people are talking about how the Disney film, the Disney Corporation with animation was revived back in that period. Pooh didn't do well at the box office, which also put a nail in Disney deciding, okay, well, we're done with 2D animation. But I think over the years it has a respect and it has a quality, and it's just, for me, if I want to watch something, I mean, it's the same for everybody. You have to be in the right mood to watch a certain specific type of movie. You can't pop on bloody Requiem for a Dream if you're feeling in a happy mood or something. Like, you need to be prepared to have your emotions destroyed. Winnie the Pooh, you're feeling grumpy, it'll make you feel happy. If you're already feeling happy, it'll keep you happy. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you smile. Pooh's a great character, the voice acting's great. Again, you want to hear more about Winnie the Pooh, check out that other episode. But when I looked at what could be on the bottom of this list, when I ranked it up against all the other contenders, I was like, Winnie the Pooh, that's the one where, even thinking about it now, I would like to go and rewatch it again. So Winnie the Pooh, solid at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is a rather recent addition to my list because I only just watched it for the first time last year. It's called Attack the Block. Attack the Block is great. It's a very exciting action style, also mixed with a bit of horror and sci-fi elements, starring John Boyega in one of his early big starring roles, and also Jodie Whittaker, who went on to become the Doctor on Doctor Who. It's about a group of miscreant children who run around their block and cause trouble, get up to all sorts of mischief. But on one particular night, aliens descend from the sky, these creatures that have come to Earth basically to mate. So they're all in heat and they all want to eviscerate everybody that they come in contact with. So what starts is John Boyega and his crew are a bunch of dickhead scoundrels who you don't really feel any sort of compassion or need for. Over the course of the movie, they slip into more heroic roles to protect each other. Specifically, they got the bro code and also their block as well that gets slowly overrun by these aliens, but also dealing with asshole drug dealers, belligerent cops, neighbors who are either helpful or hindrances. It's so much fun from start to finish. There's a real sense of adrenaline to it. I avoided watching it for so long because I heard that the monsters were quite scary, and they are. So there's some imagery in here which is quite disturbing. There's a point where a guy gets his face just eaten off very slowly by a swarm of these creatures. But what saves it is these are a genuine likable bunch of kids. They start off being dickheads, but they especially John Boyega's character, there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of not what is said about what drives these certain characters, and the movie doesn't really feel like it needs to explain that to you. It just needs to show you just enough to know, all right, these are characters I want to get behind. When they're running, when they're desperately trying to get away from these aliens, there's some real tense moments, and always juxtaposed with some good comedy, so it never gets too dark or grim. There's still a vibe of fun action. Oh boy, let's get into it. Let's race from some more aliens. It's exciting. Nick Frost is in here as a weird weed dealing side character. He's not in it a lot, so he's all over the poster and everything. It's not Nick Frost's movie. It is 100% John Boyega. And I can absolutely imagine the Star Wars people seeing this movie and being like, we want John Boyega in the Star Wars world because he's great. Jodie Whittaker is also good too, as the character that comes around to the group. There's some violent deaths. Some people die that you don't want to die. Some people survive that you wish didn't survive. But it's a solid sci-fi horror action film that I don't know if that many people know about it. I certainly didn't know about it for quite some time, and I'm glad I watched it, and it absolutely cemented itself for me for number 9 on our top 10 movies of 2011. All right, we're probably going to go through the next 2 entries quite quickly because I've really gone into these films. Number 8 is Thor, the first Thor film that came out in 2011, the 4th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe at that time. So I have a whole episode donated to Thor. It's part of my Marvel Cinematic Universe ongoing series of episodes. So if you really want me to get into the depths of why Thor is a great film, go and have a look at that. But the basics here, Thor, it's the first entry for Thor. So it's Thor before he was the big comedy, Big Lebowski guy that he is now. It's very much more faithful to Thor in the comics and Thor of legend and mythology and all that stuff. He's the dickhead son of Odin who's arrogant and greedy and vain. He dreams of ruling the throne, gets into all sorts of mischief and problems so that Odin casts him out of Asgard, takes him away all his powers, does the whole throws his hammer down after him, and if one day he is worthy, he'll be able to get his powers back. Or anybody who's particularly worthy could get the powers of Thor. Then it's a fish out of water story where Thor is stuck in New Mexico, smooching with Natalie Portman and hanging out with her friends, where S.H.I.E.L.D. comes along and gets involved. Meanwhile, the more gripping story is up in Asgard, where Thor's very complicated, emotionally wise brother Loki enacts a plan of sorts to eventually take the throne of Asgard for himself, and apparently also wipe out the human race. People look back on Thor. I thought people liked Thor more than they do. But there seems to be this, Thor's always been the weaker of the franchises. I say that about the second Thor, but the first Thor really made me like the character of Thor, and I was really excited to see him eventually join into the Avengers that was obviously coming. This was back in a day where the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in baby form. So yes, we knew that Phil Coulson was going to be in the movie, but we didn't really know how the world and mythology of Thor could work alongside the very real world that the Iron Man film had set up beforehand. Chris Hemsworth absolutely killed it as Thor. I doubted he would be good. I was wrong. Tom Hiddleston as Loki was the real star of the movie, without a doubt. And I really like the vibe of the movie, the whole Shakespearean element that Kenneth Branagh put into it with his direction style. Putting aside the thousands of Dutch angles, the way that Asgard looks and sounds and feels and the characters, I really liked that world, and I was excited to learn that we will be going back to that in future Thor films. The New Mexico stuff, yeah, it's probably weakest, but it elevates by, even in those early days, Chris Hemsworth had fantastic comedic timing, and showing him smashing cups and asking a pet store for a dog to ride was some good stuff. Again, I go heavily into Thor in its own episode, to be sure to check about that. But when I go through all the movies in 2011, I have to put Thor on. It slips down further and further on the list the more movies I watch. But I think it's a solid film and a great start to the Thor character in the Thor franchise. I love it. And it's solid at number 8 on this list. Then moving on to number 7, again, another movie that has its whole episode devoted to it, is Captain America: The First Avenger. The first movie in the Captain America franchise. Very much the same sort of setup as Thor. Again, this movie has its own episode in the Marvel Cinematic Universe series. So if you want me to go really deep into this film, go check that one out. But Captain America really surprised me in how much fun and exciting it was. I learnt later that the movie is directed by the guy who directed The Rocketeer, Joe Johnston. The Rocketeer is a wonderful little film full of hope and wonder about another misfit who gains an ability or a power or a tool that helps him become a hero in his own sense, in his own way. And that's very much what's going on in here. Steve Rogers, skinny little Steve Rogers, before he's got the super soldier serum, he desperately wants to fight in World War II, but he's not well enough in any sense of the world to contribute. But his courage and his optimism is pointed out by a kindly scientist who picks him to get the super soldier serum, following which he becomes the superheroic Captain America and leads the Howling Commandos and the rest of America against the Nazis in World War II, eventually going up against his evil counterpart, Red Skull, played by Hugo Weaving. The movie does fall down a bit towards the end because it is definitely trying to set up getting Captain America to the present to play with the Avengers. It's more of an attempt to take a character and get them ready for another movie, more so than Thor. But seeing the hero's journey, seeing Steve Rogers evolve as a character on screen, hear him become Captain America, and the relationship he has with his best friend Bucky, and the patriotism that's going on there. I think what won me over for this movie is that before going in, I knew nothing about Captain America except some really terrible movies that I had seen that were made in the 90s. And the vibe was always Captain America's a bit of a goody two-shoes, a bit of a America first style. Yeah. Like there wasn't that much there to evolve as a character. He wasn't that exciting. But Chris Evans surprised everybody because no one didn't think Chris Evans would be a good Captain America, I think. Really made Steve Rogers a relatable character and B, an interesting and likable character. There was more to his personality and more to his motivational drives than just, I want to fight for America because I love America. My favorite part of the movie is when he's finally accepted into the army, when he's not advertising and going after war bonds, and him and the Howling Commandos are carrying out their missions. I'd like to see more of that in the movie. But again, in terms of what the movie eventually led to, establishing the Captain America character and Chris Evans and what he would eventually go on to, going back to this movie and rewatching it and seeing that reputation, that energy be born, it's great stuff. Captain America just edges out ahead of Thor for me because of that, because Captain America was consistent from this point on. He just got better and better. But Thor, when the dip that he took in Thor 2 and how his character in itself has really changed depending on who has control of him directing the movies, he's not as consistent. So Captain America edges ahead of him and gets the spot at number 7. All right, coming in at number 6 is Fast 5, or Fast and Furious 5 if you live here in Australia. I will say until the day I die that all those smart-ass directors, specifically Adam McKay or Mackay, however you say his name, who take those cheap shots at Fast and Furious movies and say that the people who watch them have low IQs or they're not real movies or anything like that. Shut the hell up and put your head back up your ass, because no one asked you. The Fast and the Furious movies are solid movies for the most part. They have one or two misfires here and there, but the dedication put into them by Vin Diesel and crew is genuine, and you see it. And as it gets bigger and bigger as a blockbuster, it still hasn't substituted that essence of family and excitement, and it knows its fan base and it rewards them for sticking with them for so long. There was a time before this movie when the Fast and the Furious was just Point Break but with cars in the early 2000s. It stumbled along as it made its sequels. It didn't really know exactly what it was going to do, what it wanted to be. And then Fast 5 came along. Fast 5 united all the characters and all the storylines that had been established sporadically through the last few Fast and Furious movies and pulled them all together and turned the franchise into a heist franchise with using cars to commit robberies or save the world. So you pulled in all these characters: Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, Tyrese Gibson, Ludacris, Gal Gadot before she was Wonder Woman, Sung Kang. They basically have to steal a giant safe from this nasty old guy while being hunted by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's Luke Hobbs, who's like the super duper badass policeman who's going to bring them down and go toe to toe with Vin Diesel. This was the movie that solidified what the franchise would become. It knew what it needed to change to make it more appealing to everybody, and it knew what it needed to seize on, to capitalize on, in essence, the characters, the big action spectacles, and the emotional drama that's going on in there. Yes, they're silly. Yes, they have cars fly off cliffs and bulldozer through a city landscape with a safe plowing along behind them. But it's all good fun, and it still packs an emotional punch when it has to. From this point on, from Fast 5 onwards, a Fast and Furious movie has always been an event. They've always upped the game in what they're doing, and while with F9 that came out recently, it does start to feel a little tired, Fast 5 started a period where the adventures of Dominic Toretto and co. was just one of the most exciting things you could see at the cinema. In terms of the Fast and Furious movies, Furious 7 just inches ahead of this movie in terms of emotional impact on me, but that has an unfair bias because of the Paul Walker situation that comes with it. If you take that out, Fast 5, I think, is a better film. It has had a lot riding on it. It proved everybody wrong in terms of making the Fast and Furious franchise a sustainable franchise, and it is fun to go back and rewatch and see all the characters come together and pull off their stunts and have Vin Diesel start talking about family like it's the most important thing in the world, because it eventually becomes the most important thing in the world. I love Fast 5, and I'm genuinely happy that it's here on this list at number 6. Coming in at number 5, Kung Fu Panda 2. I've also discussed this quite heavily in my last ranking of top 10 DreamWorks films. Kung Fu Panda came in at number 2. So I don't have that much more to say about it, except that it is an impressive animated film that really shows people that animated films are not just for kids. When enough motion is put into them and enough of a storyline and some real heart and all of that, you get a genuinely powerful, affecting film for all ages. It's the continuing story of Po and the Furious Five. There's an evil peacock called Lord Shen, voiced by Gary Oldman, who's trying to wipe out all the masters of Kung Fu with his fireworks. Po and friends go after him in an attempt to bring him down, and Po learns that Master Shen has a very violent history with his origin story and what happened to his parents and why he ended up with James Hong's Mr. Ping, the duck or chicken or whatever it is that he is in the movie. The animation looks incredible. For 2011 as well, when you think of how animation has continued to evolve since then, you still go back and watch this film and it just looks magical, especially that final scene of Po standing in the river deflecting fireworks and firebolts with his kung fu power. The music from the Kung Fu Panda, the soundtrack has always been phenomenal, and they kick it up to high gear in this film. The emotional resonance of Po's origin, while also balancing it by making it have that punch, but not be so serious that kids will either get bored or not enjoy the film. They still have a nice balance of humor and excitement. Jack Black's comedic timing as Poe continues to be great, and it's just a fantastic film in its own right. Not just a fantastic animated film, but a fantastic film. I've gone very much into this in the DreamWorks Countdown, so be sure to check that one out if you haven't. If you want me to go more into this, but suffice it to say, if Kung Fu Panda 2 is only at number 5 on this list, then you know that we've got some good stuff coming just around the corner. Alright, coming in at number 4 is Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the 4th film in the Mission Impossible franchise, and in my opinion, the first in the trilogy of Mission Impossible films that set it above the previous films, but also above most action films in general. I enjoyed the Mission Impossible films before this one. I'd caught 1, 2, and 3 quite recently before I'd watched the film, and I enjoyed the action in it. It was the standard Tom Cruise action affair. Again, depending on who was in control of the film, the way the action was presented was wildly different. I mean, Tom Cruise changes his hair depending on what style of action and direction you're going to get. But this film was directed by Brad Bird, and it tends to lean more into what's established in Mission Impossible 3, the vibes and the action style of that, which is a more grounded take on the situations, pulls away from focusing on outlandish gadgets and mask wearing and things that are more familiar with either the Mission Impossible TV show or James Bond and that sort of thing. Pulled out Simon Pegg as Benji from the 3rd film, moved aside a couple of the characters that have been around for most of the franchise, obviously kept Tom Cruise, but set in a pretty simple action story of Tom Cruise and his team having to stop a terrorist from committing terrorist stuff, as they do. But IMF has come under attack during that time, meaning that the whole team is disavowed. They don't have any backup, they don't have any resources, they have to stop the bad guys on their own. It really started building on the Ethan Hunt character as it focused less on making him emotional in any sense of the word, and more a tool, a powerhouse, which you point him in the right direction and he will get the job done. And the emotions were saved for the rest of his team, whether it's Jeremy Renner's mysterious addition to the team, or Benji going from a computer expert to being a field agent, or Paula Patton as the kick-ass female agent of the group. And then it really started leaning into that big appeal of the Mission Impossible films, which is what crazy stunt will Tom Cruise do for this movie, which in this one was him climbing that giant tower in Dubai, which he actually did outside on little gloves with magnets, which if they break for even a second, he's going to fall to his death. A lot of suspense moments, a lot of things that took advantage of the cinema spectacle. We're seeing this stuff on the big screen can be incredibly overwhelming and engaging. That has only been built on from the previous Mission Impossible films, and even Top Gun Maverick recently. It is a lot of fun. It was unexpected fun. It was something where I was like, okay, there's another Mission Impossible movie, I'll go check it out. And I was just surprised by how exciting it was, how good it was, how much it made me want to see more movies from the franchise, which obviously it left into Rogue Nation, and then in 2018 Fallout, which is almost my number 1 film of that year. It just loses out to Avengers Infinity War. Brad Bird is a great director, and he shows it whether he's directing animation like The Incredibles or this. Tom Cruise, I'll watch him climb on top of or hang off of or jump off of anything at this point. Simon Pegg steals a lot of the scenes that he's in. Great excitement, great suspense, a really solid action film that took advantage of we can still do this stuff in real life rather than all in front of green screens and CG and all of that stuff too. Personal favorite of mine, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol at number 4. Then we move on to number 3, which finally is a movie that's not part of a franchise or a big action spectacle or anything like that. It's a little movie called The Untouchables, and it's not even an English-speaking film. It is a French film starring Omar Sy, and I think it's Gerard Depardieu. No, I'm not even going to guess who the other actor is because I'll get it wrong. But this is a fantastic film. You may have seen a version of it if you've seen a movie called The Upside, starring Bryan Cranston and Kevin Hart. It's basically an American remake of this film, but it's not as good. This is absolutely incredible. Basically, there's a rich fella who is paralyzed. He cannot move. apart from talking, but he's in his little wheelchair and he needs somebody to look after him. Omar Sy is a rough, degenerate piece of shit character, really, who is just looking for the doll. He just wants to get paid to do nothing. So he thinks this might be an opportunity to do that. Or at least he wants to get his form signed to say that he did try and get this job and he was turned away. But the rich guy goes, nah, I like him. He's funny. I would like him to be my carer. Omar Sy is not a fan of that in the beginning, but over time, as you would expect, the relationship between these two grows and evolves to a level of camaraderie and love and respect for each other, which becomes so rock solid by the end of the film. It is wonderfully acted by our lead characters. It's just wonderful to see them become friends and the hijinks that they get involved into. There's a lot of serious underlying tone, so where our characters got to this point in the movie, but it never really focuses on that and takes that away from just kind of like Winnie the Pooh, just a general feel-good movie to see these characters evolve and become friends and go on crazy adventures. The parasailing scene is one of the best scenes in the movie. It's very exciting and very funny as well. And I think if you're looking for emotion as well, this will hit you in the feels for 100%. I have trouble recommending it to people because I know a lot of people that are turned off by subtitles. And yes, this is a subtitles film, it's not dubbed. But you get lost in the portrayal and the acting and the story so much so that you kind of forget you are reading subtitles. The emotion coming from the voices and the action in front of you, you get lost in it and you get emotionally invested in this unlikely odd couple. I love The Untouchables. It is such a good movie. It makes me feel good. And even when it makes me feel sad, it also makes me feel good. And, you know, there's tons of Harry Potters and Planet of the Apes and Sherlock Holmes, all these exciting movies that came out that year. But when I go to watch The Untouchables, I know I'm in for a good time. It would be number one on this list if it weren't for personal biases that just edge it out. But it's solid. If you haven't seen The Untouchables, I highly recommend it. Here on this list at number 3. All right, and at number 2, we have Warrior. If you're a regular listener on this show, you know that A, I love boxing films, and B, I love underdog films. And while this isn't a boxing film, it's a mixed martial arts film, the vibes and the feel and the emotional drama are all still there for sure. Warrior tells the story of two estranged brothers, one played by Tom Hardy, one played by Joel Edgerton, who have a terrible relationship with each other and with their father, played by Nick Nolte, but also through different paths have ended up becoming very good at mixed martial arts. They end up getting invited to a big MMA tournament in Atlantic City, with the prize being a lot of money that both of them could use, and they end up competing against each other. You know, watching this movie, that they probably won't fight until the final fight, but the movie is less about the actual MMA boxing, fighting, whatever. As with most Rocky films and Creed films, it's less about the action and more about the characters behind it and the emotional stakes and investment. The strained relationship between Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton is very hard to watch because it's very relatable. You know those people in your family who you try really hard with, but they just push all your buttons the wrong way, and somehow you end up fighting and arguing when there's really no need to be. Or circumstances beyond your control has driven a wedge between you and your family member or your friend. In this case, in the movie, it's how they perceive the relationship between their father and their mother and the way their family broke and who's to blame and all of that stuff on there. You could argue that Joel Edgerton is the more heroic of the characters, but then Tom Hardy will go and do something and you feel for him more, to that point where by the time the final fight goes down and you see them facing off, you have absolutely no idea who you want to win, who you think should win. And all the supporters, all everybody there, they all want blood, but you just want them to just stop and hug, and obviously that's not going to happen. Nick Nolte is great as their dad. There's a lot going on in his previous life as an alcoholic in the movie, and how that affected relationships with both of his sons, Joel Edgerton's extended family, and his school where he teaches at, Tom Hardy's army buddies. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. I don't want to spoil how the movie ends or what gets from point A to point B if you haven't seen this film. But it goes for my Achilles heel, my kryptonite, which is these sports underdog character development emotional dramas with the same as Southpaw and everything else like that. Warrior, even though I know how the movie turns out now, I still get the same chills and goosebumps watching it because I know how I want the movie to end, I know how it does end, and I know how it should end. And somehow I'm both satisfied and disappointed all at once. And not disappointed in a bad way, it's just the emotional roller coaster that this movie takes on. Warrior is great. It should be number one, but it's been kicked out by Marvel, as you would expect. Anyway, Warrior's here at number 2. Before we get into our number 1, as usual, here are too many honourable mentions for movies that just couldn't beat Winnie the Pooh onto the list. We have Source Code, Jake Gyllenhaal starring Groundhog Day type movie where he has to try and stop a bomb from going off on a train and goes round and round and round. Horrible Bosses, great comedy starring one of my all-time favorite comedians, Charlie Day, teamed up with Jason Bateman and Jason Sudeikis, where they decide they're going to kill their bosses. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. This movie used to be on my list, but it's tainted by J.K. Rowling. However, I will say that for the final movie in the Harry Potter franchise, it does a very good job at getting the stakes to a climactic point and then finishing it all up. It's just its rewatchability that has unfortunately been hurt because of reasons beyond its control. Cowboys and Aliens, a fun Jon Favreau directed movie where Daniel Craig and Harrison Ford and Olivia Wilde go up against aliens and they are cowboys. It's really fun. Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the first of the fantastic Planet of the Apes trilogy. Not as good as Dawn and War, but certainly a solid start. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, one of those Cold War spy thrillers where you really need to be in the mood to watch it and have to pay attention to everything that's going on to understand all the twists and betrayals. Gary Oldman is great in it. The Adventures of Tintin, a lovely little Tintin animated movie. I was aware of Tintin, but I didn't realize how much I would like him and Snowy and Captain Haddock until I watched this film. Tower Heist, a personal favorite of mine. It felt like a comeback of sorts for Eddie Murphy in a comedy film where he and Ben Stiller plan to rob their old boss. The Muppets, the return of the Muppets after years of being around but not really being around, spearheaded by Jason Segel. It's a love letter to the history of the Muppets and also an attempt to update them for the modern day, and it works really well. Johnny English Reborn. Years after that first Johnny English, I had absolutely no faith that this movie would be any good, but I should have had more faith in Rowan Atkinson. It's a fun spy adventure, a return to the character of Johnny English. It's silly, it's goofy, and I love it to bits. And Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. It's not as good as the first Sherlock Holmes. I think it delves more into action rather than the actual appeal of a Sherlock Holmes movie, which is the mystery. But Jared Harris is great as Professor Moriarty, and I really enjoy Sherlock and Moriarty facing off against each other in this movie. But our number 1 film of the year, yes, it's a Marvel film, but it's not a Marvel Cinematic Universe film. It's X-Men First Class. X-Men First Class was a revitalization for the X-Men franchise after the lackluster appeal of X-Men The Last Stand and the misfire of X-Men Origins Wolverine. Clearly there was a rethink about what they wanted to do. So instead they decided to do a prequel movie showing the origins of Charles Xavier and Magneto, how they became the best of friends, how they started the X-Men, how they got caught up in the tensions of the Cold War of that time, and how eventually their differing opinions of humans and mutants caused them to split unrepairably. It's directed by Matthew Vaughn, so it's got that hip, exciting vibes that you get from a Kingsman movie. And the characters of Xavier and Magneto are wonderfully played by James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. The relationship between the two of them, you absolutely buy that even though they come from different upbringings and have different views, that they could become such solid friends and then reach a point where they're pulled apart to a point of no return. Seeing those early days of the X-Men against the 60s background is a lot of fun. You get early Banshee, Havoc, Azazel, Emma Frost, they're all in here. There's Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique and Nicholas Holt's Beast are the only real ones that I think stuck past that movie in terms of remembrance. They got the chance to go on onto other movies and really embrace the characters as their own. The rest, I mean, it's always been the problem with X-Men films. You pick the 1 or 2 main X-Men Hugh Jackman's Wolverine mainly, and then the others are just sort of there in the background. But it's still fun to see them all learn how to use their powers and become a team. Kevin Bacon is fun as the villain of the piece, Sebastian Shaw. He's got a good origin connection to Magneto, and it was surprised me that Kevin Bacon could do it. I didn't think he'd be good as a villain. I was wrong. And it left the movie in a place where I was excited about the X-Men films again. I was ready to see more, specifically with this group. And somehow this movie kicked the ball forward, which eventually steamrolled into X-Men Days of Future Past in 2014, which was my favorite film of that year, which combined somehow seamlessly the Hugh Jackman era and the James McAvoy era into one exciting showpiece. But it all started with X-Men First Class proving that the X-Men still had something to give. 11 years after their first film, X-Men in 2000, showed that James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender could take on these roles originated by Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen and absolutely turn them into their own. X-Men First Class is fun, it's exciting, action-packed, emotional where it needs to be as well, in ways that Marvel movies before the Marvel Cinematic Universe just weren't, and definitely my favorite film of 2011. There you are then. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed my utter rambling that these lists always turn to be. I hope you got some good info, some good reasoning why these movies are on my list. And if you don't agree with me, I couldn't give two shits, to be honest. It will be harder as we go back because I'll probably need to actually rewatch some films to really make a really significant list for 2010 or 2009. If I'm still doing this when we get to bloody 1990, that'll be crazy. But they're fun. I enjoy ranking them. I enjoy remembering films that came out in a certain period of time and how cinema was a thing at that point. The way cinema operated in 2011 is very different from the way it was now. You didn't have San Diego Comic-Cons in the middle of 2011 just absolutely blowing everybody away with the next slate of films for the next 25 years. Or announcements of casting before a film has even got to the script. You know, it's crazy times. It's much different than back then, and it'll get even more different as we go further back in time. I will be back next week. I'm not sure for what. If I play my cards right, I might be able to review a movie. I just don't know if I can watch the movie that I want to review, but we'll see. If not, I'll find something else to talk about, as I always do. But until then, stay safe, stay kind to one another. I love and appreciate you all as always. And thank you again for listening to Spliced In Later. I really do appreciate it. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.